Hi everyone, my name is Mason and I work for Comet Backup here in New Zealand. Welcome along to the Elara release webinar. So this is a new webinar schedule. I've been regularly running this webinar series that showcases the latest and greatest new features Comet has to offer. And for the last few years I've been running these every month, and by my count this is episode 20. But for this year we're changing up the release schedule a bit. It's all on the webinar platform. You can subscribe to notifications about when we go live. But the short summary is that instead of running a monthly webinar, we're now writing monthly blog posts instead, and we'll just have these webinars once a quarter around the big quarterly releases. So please check out our blog if you want to keep your finger on the pulse. My talk today will probably be about 30 minutes, and that's including some time for questions at the end. If you're watching this live on our webinar platform, I'm coming to you live. It's 9 a.m. here in New Zealand. There is a questions widget. You click the button to pop it open, and if you have any questions as we go, just write them in and I'll do my best to answer them at the end. So about 30 minutes, maybe a bit less. Everyone's busy, so I will keep it short. Otherwise, hope you've got a coffee, get settled in, and I will just press on with things. So as you've seen from the title, today I'm going to talk about Comet 22.2 Elara, our latest and greatest software release version. So the 22.2 version number, it's the year and the month. So we release new Comet versions actually every week under the Voyager release track, and then every quarter, 4 times a year, we take all of our regular Voyager development and roll it up into these quarterly milestone releases, and that's your new fixed point to sort of build on, offer to your customers, and we'll support it with patches and then the tickets, and another quarter's flown by. And so today I'm going to recap all the new things you can expect when upgrading to the Elara release. So what you're seeing here in the picture, the little white dot next to the arrow, this is Elara. It's a moon of Jupiter. It's another moon of Jupiter. All of Jupiter's moons are named after women who are close to Zeus in Greek mythology, and we've named all of the quarterly releases after moons of Jupiter recently. Our Voyager release track, we started with Mercury in the inner solar system a few years ago, and we're slowly moving outward, naming our releases after further outward outer planets and moons. We're up to Jupiter. Elara is the 8th largest moon of Jupiter, and it's still pretty small. It's really hard to get a good picture of it, and it was discovered only in 1905. But enough about the name. What about the features? We've counted 12 features and 24 enhancements, and they're actually pretty big features this time. The full changelog is available on our website in the release notes section, but I will walk you through some of the main new features right now, starting with Synology SPK client installer. So Comet Backup now has an SPK package installer available for Synology NAS devices. This is a great way to ensure that your NAS devices are backed up in a consistent way with all of your other, Comet devices. So it's a new download option. As with the existing Windows, Mac OS, and Linux client installer downloads, you get started with Synology by downloading your SPK package from the Comet Server Downloads page. It supports both DSM 6 and 7 firmware versions, as well as both ARM and x86 processors. So this covers almost the entire range of Synology devices. We do expect a very high level of compatibility. Persist through DSM OS upgrades. So up till now, it has been possible to install the Linux version of Comet Backup on a Synology device if you enabled SSH access to it, but this was a pretty complicated process, and upgrades to the DSM firmware would often cause the installed Comet Backup client to get deleted, and using the new SPK package avoids all these problems. The installation process is much simpler because your branded Comet client gets installed via the Synology web interface through the Synology package manager. You will see that there are 2 separate download links for if your NAS device is running the DSM-6 or DSM-7 firmware. In DSM-6, Comet has full access to the system to back up and restore files, but in DSM-7, Synology introduced a sandboxing system for packages to improve security. As a result, you need to explicitly grant the Comet Backup app, our Synology app, access to your storage after installation. So please check the documentation closely when going through this process for the first time. And at this stage, the new Synology installer is being released at no additional cost, but please note that we do plan to introduce a booster charge of $1 per Synology device starting on April 15th, 2022. So the Synology installer just makes it much easier to run Comet on your Synology NAS device, and this has been one of the top feature requests on our feature voting page. If you're not aware of our feature voting page, we look at the system often to help guide our development priorities. If you've been using Comet for a while and you have ideas about how we could improve the software, really encourage you to check out the feature voting system, make your voice heard, share any new ideas you have. And often multiple MSPs will get together to talk about different ideas and really work through the concept, and it's really helpful for everyone. So that's Synology settings screen. We have shipped a major redesign of the settings screen in this Voyager cycle, and this replaces the setup wizard. So previously, Comet server's integrated settings configuration led you through a wizard, but over time the wizard just became really too long as we added more and more settings. And the new settings page makes it far easier to navigate to the specific single setting you're looking for, making for a much improved experience compared to the old way of clicking the next button over and over again. As part of this change, we've also renamed organizations to tenants. So this is the feature that lets you construct a multi-tenant world. Tenants are Comet server's feature to partition your Comet server into multiple isolated zones so you can sell access to reseller partners or unrelated companies and give them a nearly full Comet server experience within your one Comet server that you still have global management over. And one more change in the settings screen is a test connections button for storage role storage. So storage role, the part of Comet server that accepts user data uploads. You might be using direct cloud or local hard drives instead, but you can upload data to the Comet server. But if you're not 100% sure about the credentials, where that Comet server is storing the data, maybe your cloud storage provider credentials aren't quite right, or your SMB credentials, the new test connection button will let you check it immediately, and that just shortens that debug cycle time when you're configuring your storage environment. Moving on, another new feature in Elara is improvements to the recovery environment. So Comet Backup supports taking disk image backups of a Windows PC or server, and this is a bare metal backup of all disk sectors for disaster recovery purposes. When you take a disk image backup with Comet, you can restore it back as a VMDK file for virtual booting, physical to virtual, P2V, or uploading to a cloud provider to virtual boot in the cloud, or you can directly re-image a local drive. When the time comes to restore, say you've backed up your Windows OS on C drive, you'll find that when you go to restore, Windows is currently running from C drive, and it's not possible to overwrite it and while it's running. And this is a good and important restriction because overwriting the running operating system, including its page files and drivers and kernel, would be a recipe for an instant blue screen. So instead, what Comet offers is a built-in recovery media feature. And this allows you to create a miniature Windows environment that boots directly into Comet, allowing you to safely restore your C drive partition from a disk image backup. And there are a few new features with the recovery environment that I want to talk about today. First of all, it's now possible to generate the recovery media as an ISO file, in addition to the previously existing USB flash drive support. Creating an ISO file is much more convenient if you're working in a kind of virtual environment, where it's quite hard to have a virtual flash drive. The generated ISO file can be booted via both BIOS and EFI boot. And thank you again to everyone in the feature voting system that submitted feedback that this feature was important to you. We do use your input to, guide our priorities. A few more things to say about the recovery environment. It's now also possible to reconfigure the time zone within the recovery environment. Because the recovery media, you generated on one PC and maybe booted on another PC, the time zone settings might not match. And this can cause a problem for, in particular, any S3 compatible provider, because the S3 compatible protocol involves the current time, and many cloud providers require a close time sync in order to access the storage. So in the past, you would have to go to the advanced tools menu inside the recovery media, open a command prompt, use the command line tools to update the time. But now it's as simple as picking the change time zone option from the menu bar and following the wizard. One more thing to say about the recovery environment is that it's now possible to view the media generation logs. In the past, you could only see one line of the logs, but some types of error generating the media are better understood with a bit more log context. And so we've redesigned the wizard generation flow to show a bit more information on that process. Just keeping on the subject of disk image, backup jobs in Comet, it's now possible to restore single files and folders from inside a disk image backup job. When you select a disk image backup job to restore, you'll see a new third option alongside the existing physical disk partition and virtual disk VMDK restore options. And if you select this new option, you can browse and restore single files or folders. This feature is available from either the Comet Backup desktop app or from the Comet server web interface when you're remotely controlling a live connected device. And the way this works is that when you perform a disk image backup in Comet, Comet produces a backup job snapshot containing a VMDK file that is a complete image of the raw partition data. When you go to restore single files from it using this new feature, Comet will attempt to parse the backed up VMDK files directly from the storage vault without spooling, so no temporary disk space is required for this feature. If you intend to restore a large amount of files, this process it's got some extra indirection on it. It's a bit less efficient. But if you've only got a few files to restore, it's significantly more convenient because just pick the files you want and don't restore the entire disk image, and that will reduce the total bandwidth and help achieve your recovery time objectives. One important caveat to note is because Comet has to parse and process the file system within the VMDK, remotely on cloud storage through the chunking, through the encryption, we can't really rely on the operating system's file system driver, and so we don't mount it inside Windows, and we don't have exhaustive support for all file systems. So this feature currently only supports parsing the NTFS file system and regular file types, directories, symlinks, and EFS files. That covers 99% of all Windows file systems that you see, but please bear in mind that some exotic NTFS features, some types of reparse point, other file systems such as FAT, exFAT, or ReFS are not supported yet by our custom file system parser. However, this independent NTFS implementation does mean that our custom parser is operating system non-specific. So restoring single files from a Windows disk image backup can be done on any Comet device platform, such as a Mac OS or Linux device logged into the same account, because we're not relying on Windows' driver to make this work. And of course, this feature integrates with the other restore options, such as restoring files directly to an archive, so that's zip and tar, and also performing test restores with the download only, do not save option. So single file restore from disk image, a great new feature in Comet 22.2 Elara. Run backup if the last job was missed. So when you're configuring a user's scheduled backup job settings, you can schedule a backup job to run at any particular time, or also when certain events happen, and this is an advanced schedule option. I'll give you some background information on why this feature is useful. So the normal thing to do in Comet is to create regular schedules for a certain time of day. Perhaps you want to back up at 5 p.m. every day. But if you're working with laptop devices that are often offline, a regular job schedule is often insufficient. So one solution for this problem is to aim for a scheduled time, say 5 p.m. every day, but if the laptop is not available at that time, then run a new backup job immediately to catch up as soon as the device is seen online again. And in the past, we did have an option for this. We had an option called when the PC starts if the last job was missed. But it turns out that modern laptops hardly ever really turn fully off between always connected PCs, ACPC, Windows Fast Startup. The PC usually only enters a deep sleep state, and so we weren't triggering that full PC start event, and so we were not catching up on those missed jobs. So instead of looking at whether the PC has actually fully booted up or not, we've now changed the setting to be based on live connection resumption. So the device will look at when the live connection to the Comet server is dropped and reconnected. And because this happens during PC sleep, during PC sleep, all the network connections go down. This is a possible time to check if the new schedule option should run now. So we've updated this setting to just say if the last job was missed. And this reflects the concept that we will make use of other possible signal indicators to make this happen in practice. The Comet Backup desktop app now has improved support for high DPI screens. If you have your Windows OS set to 150% scaling size, previously Comet would round up to 200%. And 150 and 200% was, it's easier for us because if you've got a line that's 1 pixel wide, uh, it's very easy to make it 2 pixels wide, but going to the 1.5 pixels is a little bit complicated. So uh, fractional percentage scaling was a problem for us. And 150%, 200%, can you tell the difference? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But actually, it was quite inconvenient because right now on the market there are many 14-inch laptops available with high DPI screens that ship from the factory at 150% scale. And the screen resolution is quite nice, 1080p at 14-inch, but just so that meets Comet's minimum system requirements for screen resolution. But because of the 150% scaling and Comet bumping it up to 200%, the Comet Backup app is actually larger than the physical screen by default, and so that was a problem for us. So we just fixed it. We've upgraded our Qt integration on Windows to improve this, and now Comet will seamlessly work at round number scale fractions. So Comet is now the right shape and size, no matter what percentage fractional DPI scaling you have. The next time you look at the Comet Server web interface, you'll see a new search bar at the top of the screen. And the search bar is in the Comet Server web interface, and it allows you to quickly find user accounts by entering a few characters of their name. Type in their name, get the results, that's all there is to it. It has been immediately useful. It's one of those things that, it's so obviously good and helpful, especially when navigating around a large Comet server with a lot of user accounts. And this request also came from our feature voting system, so thanks to everyone who voted and commented on it for their advocacy and suggestions. It's interesting to note the search bar will also find matching protected items and storage vaults, and this is kind of the first feature we've got that lets you find all matches of these by name in the Comet Server web interface. There are a few highly interesting scenarios that this enables. For instance, if you're backing up if you've got a market segment and they all use a certain product, you could put that product's name in the protected item's name and then suddenly find all users in order to troubleshoot them in bulk. Or if you're migrating storage platforms, finding all storage vaults named after your old storage type might be helpful. And this has keyboard shortcuts for maximum productivity for keyboard users. You can focus the search field with Alt-Q, just like Outlook on Windows, and you can navigate through the results with the arrow keys. Two-factor authentication. So we all know how important it is as a defense against online attackers. If your password gets leaked, then two-factor is your last defense, and it's a pretty good defense. Probably the only downside is it can be an annoying extra step. So anything that makes it simpler to use, simplifies entering your two-factor code, I think is a positive step. So I'm pleased to announce that we have made it easier a little bit. This pop-up dialog you're seeing here is Windows Hello two-factor, integrated with the Comet Server web interface. And Windows Hello is obviously the Windows framework for a lot of security technologies, and that means Comet Server can now use facial recognition or your laptop's fingerprint scanner or your Windows PIN code to log into the website, and this is thanks to a neat technology called WebAuthn, and that's short for Web Authentication, and WebAuthn is the extended version of U2F. If you have been using a U2F dongle for two-factor logins to the Comet Server web interface, you might have recently seen a prompt in the web browser saying, oh, please upgrade to WebAuthn. And we're pleased to announce that Comet Server has completely upgraded all of our two-factor support from the old U2F to the full WebAuthn in a seamless way that preserves full compatibility with U2F devices. And on top of that, adds support for all the cool new WebAuthn things such as fingerprint readers, the Windows Hello PIN facial, Windows Hello IR cameras. So it's actually really cool to, log into Comet Server on your Android phone and just touch the fingerprint and log in that way. It just makes two-factor much more seamless if you don't have to type in numbers or anything. And there's no changes required at your end to take advantage of this new feature. We do recommend checking if you can now add additional two-factor devices. If you've got the hardware support for it, you can configure them from the Comet Server web interface from your account page. One more quick point about two-factor. So if you're not using, fancy USB dongles and fingerprint readers, Comet, of course, supports TOTP, the standard system with you scan the QR code, a 6-digit code that changes every 30 seconds. This is widely used. And like most other services using TOTP, Comet provides this QR code, and you scan it with your cell phone to enroll that code in your Authenticator app. However, we've come into some situations recently where you don't have a camera to scan the code with. For instance, if you're trying to add the QR code into a password manager or an enterprise security app. And so what we've done is we have made it possible to do this with no QR code reader by copying this text code here. And this text code at the bottom of the pop-up is now displayed when setting up TOTP in Comet Server. And that should just make life easier for users of managed TOTP systems, or if you dropped your phone and broken the camera. Moving right along, Windows Server 2008. It feels strange that we're even talking about this in 2022, 14 years later. But with Comet, we are highly aware that there is a large and diverse partner base of client devices and operating systems running in the wild. The Windows Server 2008 series of operating systems were very popular in their day, and they are coming to the end of their extended, re-extended, double extended support lifecycle from Microsoft. There's always a long tail of stragglers who are stuck on old versions of Windows Server for various reasons, and some of those are valid and important reasons, but it remains a fact that over time it becomes more difficult for us to maintain support for these old operating systems. And unfortunately, the WebAuthn feature was the straw that broke the camel's back in some ways, and we have needed to make some changes to the versions of Windows that are supported. So Comet Server will no longer run on Windows Server 2008. You'll have to upgrade to Server 2008 R2 or anything else more modern. That's the main new rule here. Just to be clear, this is only regarding the self-hosted Comet server. We still fully support the Windows Server 2008 for backing up customers. And I'll try and make it a bit clearer with a table. So this change in compatibility only affects Comet Server, not the Comet Backup clients, and it only affects the original Windows Server 2008, not the updated 2008 R2 release. We don't gather detailed telemetry about this kind of thing, but we confidently expect that very few people, if anyone, will be affected by this scenario. And of course, you're free to keep running older versions of Comet Server if necessary. More cloud storage providers. So Comet supports a lot of cloud storage providers. When you set up your Comet-based infrastructure, you're welcome to use any kind of storage you like. Maybe that's a co-located RAID array. Maybe it's a commercial cloud storage provider like Wasabi or Backblaze B2. Maybe it's just some hard drives in your basement. There's always a balance between price and quality. An additional major factor is the physical geographical location of the data, which not only affects latency. Comet's performance is quite latency sensitive. But of course, the new thing is data sovereignty requirements. If your customers are storing data that is subject to local regulations, you want them to be stored in the right countries. And we've published a large list of compatible cloud storage providers. This is inside the application itself, and we've got an even longer list on the integrations page of our website and in our documentation. And we'd certainly recommend any of them, or pretty much any provider that can be connected via a supported protocol, such as SFTP or S3 compatible protocols. But we have recently taken to adding built-in options for more and more of these partners. And throughout this last quarter, we've went through some additional qualification steps, and I'm pleased to announce that 3 new cloud storage providers have been raised to built-in options within Comet. Those 3 options are DigitalOcean Spaces. So this is an S3 compatible offering for a publicly listed US cloud company. It costs around $20 US per month per terabyte, and it's currently available in 7 countries, including the US, Netherlands, Singapore, the UK, Germany, Canada, and India. We've also added Catalyst Cloud Object Storage. So this is S3 compatible from Catalyst in New Zealand. That's 32 New Zealand dollars for a single availability zone with triple replication, and the Swarm from Cinyspace. This is the latest S3 compatible product from Cinyspace, and they've got data centers in Italy and in France. And the interesting thing about them is there are no additional charges for bandwidth. So if you're shopping around for a new cloud storage provider, there's obviously lots to pick and choose from, but we can recommend all three of these offerings, which have been tested and verified by our team for performance and reliability. Custom retention pass timing. So this is the last feature I want to talk about today, and we're getting a little bit more advanced. So Comet Backup allows you to configure retention policies to choose how long old backup jobs should be kept for. At some point, your retention policies have to be actually applied to the data in the storage vault, and this is called a retention pass. At the end of each backup job, Comet automatically considers whether it should run a retention pass to apply your retention policies. However, because the retention pass takes some additional time and additional system resources, often Comet will decide to skip running the retention pass until there's, a sufficiently worthwhile amount of space that can be saved in your storage vault. And the exact decision logic for this is more like an art than a science. We've got an excellent set of default settings that makes a good choice most of the time. But as Comet grows larger, we do find many users that are not well suited by our default settings. So if you do feel like the default behavior here is not working for you, then as of this last Voyager cycle and now available in Comet 22.2 Elara, it's now possible to override the retention pass decision logic. So you could choose this option as part of the advanced options for when setting up the backup job schedule or when running a backup job manually. And there are 4 configuration options available. The first option in the default setting is automatic. This is the same logic that Comet used in previous versions. So when this option is selected, Comet uses a number of heuristics to determine whether to run a retention pass based on, there's 3 main things it's based on. It's based on the relative device performance compared to other devices in the account. It also considers the number of backup jobs in the storage vault that exceed the configured retention policy. And also how long it's been since the last retention pass. And we have a full explanation of the rules in our documentation. We're quite transparent about how this works. If you change it to the immediate option, a retention pass will be run immediately at the end of every backup job to completely enforce your retention policy. This is particularly helpful if your data set has a large amount of changes between each incremental backup job, and you want to save as much space as possible in the storage vault, at the expense of course, it takes additional time to complete the retention pass operation. The last 2 new options are run more often and run less often. And like automatic, these options generally run retention passes after a few jobs or days have passed, but by explicitly setting more often or less often on your different devices within the same account, you can gain sort of effective control over which device in the account is generally responsible for running retention passes. So imagine for a second if you've got a low-powered laptop that's often put to sleep and a high-powered, always online server with a lot of RAM, and they're both logged in as 2 devices in the same user account, then you can use these 2 options to sort of encourage the high-powered device to do the retention pass work. You set the high-powered device to more often and the low-powered device to less often. Our automatic logic does actually, in that particular case, we do take things like uptime and system RAM into account in its decision making. But these explicit options here allow you to bias that decision in cases where you've got a clear understanding, perhaps a clearer understanding than Comet is able to come up with automatically. That's actually all I have for today. Are there any questions? So you can ask questions if you click the questions widget at the box at the bottom of the live webinar platform. And just to recap, I talked about Synology and the new SPK package installers. I talked about the disk image recovery environment and how it can now generate ISO files and customize the time zone settings. I talked about the brand new settings screen, restoring single files from a disk image backup. I talked about automatically running backup jobs if the last backup job was missed when a laptop wakes up from sleep. The DPI scaling improvements on Windows for Retina laptops and things like that. I talked about the new quick search bar in the Comet Server web interface, how our two-factor support now supports WebAuthn for fingerprint login. Unfortunately, the support changes for Windows Server 2008, now in its 14th year. Name dropped a few more cloud storage providers and the advanced feature to customize the retention pass timing. The question here, is it possible to have a VPS Comet server with an auth role and an on-prem Comet server with a storage role? Yes, yeah, of course it's possible. Yep, Comet is highly flexible. You can put your auth role and storage role servers anywhere. The one thing to be aware of is perhaps Constellation. Constellation is the feature in Comet that looks at all your Comet servers, your cloud Comet server and your on-prem Comet server, looks at all the user accounts, looks at all the buckets, and if you've got a user that's been off-boarded, then it's pretty important to see all the users at once and figure out which buckets are no longer required for storage. But that's an optional thing. Any more questions? No more questions. We've actually been going for about half an hour, so this is probably all the questions we have time for today. But we still want to hear from you. If you have any questions at all, we're always happy to help out. More than happy to hear your questions by ticket through the usual ticket system at account.cometbackup.com, or you can email us hello@cometbackup.com. Or did you know that we do support phone calls? Our company is based in New Zealand. We do have international support teams for round-the-clock level 1 technical support. But if you want a sales call or if you want any really advanced technical support or troubleshooting, we'll need to figure out a good time that suits both us in New Zealand and in your country. So just makes scheduling a bit complicated. But all you have to do is go to the Comet website. At the bottom of the page, you click Contact Us, and then there's an option to schedule a phone call with a time zone widget showing our available times, and it will just work everything out for you. We're more than happy to jump on a call, and often that's a very quick way of clearing the air and getting answers to any questions you might have. Now, I've been running these webinars for a while, and I've always sort of stopped after this third bullet point, but times are changing. For the last 2 years here in New Zealand, we've had closed borders, and so a call was kind of the best we could offer. And the closed borders actually did a really good job of keeping COVID out, but Omicron got through to us recently, so it's happening same as everywhere else, and there's not really any point keeping the borders closed any longer. So New Zealand is reopening. We look forward to possibly meeting some of you in person later in the year. The only other thing I'd like to say regarding international news is that we do have support staff in different time zones, and some of those support staff are based in Ukraine, and they have a quite difficult situation right now. So please have a little extra patience with our support team. And this picture is from the New Zealand government buildings in the capital city of Wellington. And that's all from me. Hopefully you've managed to take away some useful information. Please check out the latest version of Comet 22.2 Elara. All users of the previous quarterly series, 21.11 Himalaya and earlier, are encouraged to upgrade, but we're happy for you to keep using older versions if you feel like it. Hope you're all keeping well and safe, and you can expect another webinar for the next quarterly release in 3 months' time. Cheers.